Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road journey. This week I've come to Dorset, a county on the south coast of England, and from what I can tell, it's contributed very little to society, and it's a place that we all like to go on holiday, so I'm expecting some nice scenery. That's about it. But who knows what we'll find? Me, because I wrote the episode, but that's not the point. Today we'll be taking a journey across Dorset, starting in its most northerly town, which is Gillingham, and making our way down to Bournemouth, which is by the sea. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and I don't know what we're going to do with Gillingham. In the days of my guidebook, it was a small town with around 3,500 residents. According to this old map, there was a cheese and bacon factory, a brickworks and a cattle market, none of which exists today, so that's that. According to my guidebook, there's a church. Yep. So I think it's fair to say that there's not really a lot going on in Gillingham these days. To the west of Gillingham, in a place called Wyke, is where we find the Old Town Brewery, which dates back to the mid-19th century. In those days, it was quite common for each town to have its own brewery. Beer is important after all, and the brewery at Gillingham was run by Matthews & Co. This company was founded in the 18th century, and they lasted up until the 1960s, at which point the brewery and company were bought out by a competitor who immediately shut it all down. Today, there's a lovely cafe situated at the old brewery site. It's called the Old Brewery, obviously. And what makes this cafe interesting is that it houses a small collection of classic motorcycles. I must admit, I'm not much of a bikeist, but other than the coffee, there are one or two items that have caught my eye, so let's go take a look. This is a BSA model B27. I don't know what that is, but it's from the year 1926. I guess if I were doing a Michelin guidebook trip back in the day, I might use a machine like this. This is the Vincent Rapide, another old bike, although a bit newer. This one's from 1949. Interesting thing about Vincent is this was built and they were based in my favourite town, which is Stevenage in Hertfordshire. This is an interesting motorcycle. It's a Honda CBX 1980, and look, it has 6 cylinders. Because 4 was never enough. However, it's not the only 6-cylinder motorcycle in this cafe. This is a Horex VR6 from 2020. It too has 6 cylinders. It's a 1200cc engine, 163 horsepower, which is bloody mental. Well, what do you know about that? We found something interesting in Gillingham after all, but I must contain my excitement because we're heading off to our next destination, the town of Shaftesbury, where things didn't really work out how I had in mind. Yes, my guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to visit Castle Hill, which provides a lovely view of Shaftesbury and the surrounding area, except it doesn't today because the weather's shit, but at least I can tick it off the list. Just down there is the site of Shaftesbury Abbey, which is also recommended in my guidebook. Today it's free admission, but back in the 1920s we'd have needed to gain permission to access it from the Grosvenor Arms Hotel. I can only assume it was sat on part of their land. Anyway, we've looked at the ruins of abbeys before, and it turns out most of them were destroyed by King Henry VIII, who decided that monasteries and abbeys were shit. But what makes Shaftesbury Abbey interesting is that it's said to be one of the last abbeys destroyed by the 8th Henry that was king. Also in Shaftesbury is the most famous road ever, known as Gold Hill. Why not add this video to your watch list, and whilst you're there, why not add this one that looks at Zigzag Hill, a very fun and interesting road found a short distance from here. Moving on, and we're going to head down the A350, which will take us to our next destination. But before we get there, I found a distraction. The A350 takes the road over something called the North Dorset Trailway, which, if you were to follow that along for a while, you'll stumble across Shillingstone Railway Station, which used to be a railway station. It's now a visitor attraction. The station opened in 1863 and of course closed in the 1960s because beaching and all but the station building was removed, which is interesting because today you'll find a short section of track, sidings and a whole host of other things to keep you entertained. Looking over this old aerial photo tells a slightly different story, one of a very derelict and run-down site, but thanks to hundreds of volunteers, the railway station has been restored and the site transformed. There are plans to extend the railway and start offering passenger rides, but that's a work in progress. In the meantime, it's free admission, there's a lovely cafe, and any donations go directly towards the restoration effort, and it's a lovely way to spend an afternoon. Our next stop is the town of Blandford Forum, and we're sticking with the railway theme briefly with this abandoned viaduct, which would have been situated on the same railway line as the one used by Shillingstone Station. It was built to carry the railway over the River Stour and its floodplains, but the viaduct was mostly demolished when the railway closed, but for some reason they left this piece behind. I can only assume it wasn't necessary to remove it, and therefore nobody was prepared to pay for its demolition. As for the town of Blandford Forum, it nearly all burned down in the Great Fire of 1731. At the time, the town was heavily involved in the fabric, fashion and lace manufacturing industries, which are excellent materials as combustibles, and the end result was the vast majority of the town having to be rebuilt from scratch. And it turns out this was done by a pair of bastards. No, really, the architects that were assigned the task of rebuilding Blandford were known as John and William Bastard, aka the Bastard Brothers, and the first building that they finished in 1734 was Blandford's Town Hall, which is still standing today, just about. On the outskirts of the town is Bournemouth Camp, a military training site that's been used for such purposes since the 18th century. After the second small disagreement amongst all of the military stuff, a motor racing circuit was set up along its 3-mile-long perimeter road. The first event was held in 1948, and within a year it gained a reputation as being the fastest race circuit in the country, with speeds of 110 miles per hour being achieved on the straights. Because it was the 1940s and health and safety was yet to be invented, there were accidents. A lot of accidents. Several of them were fatal, and this led to the introduction of a rule where you had to wear a crash helmet during racing. Until this point, it had been optional. Not that it would have made much difference, though. The fact that it was a motor racing circuit built within a military site was the real issue. You got things like telegraph poles and metal stakes and a whole host of other military infrastructure dotted around the site. If you came off the track, you were colliding with something fairly solid rather than a nice tyre wall via a gravel trap. Still, stiff upper lip and all, chaps. They cracked on with it anyway, and racing would continue until the early 1960s, at which point it would come to an end, but only because the military site was looking to expand and do more military things, meaning the motor racing circuit could no longer operate, although that was probably just as well. It's on to our next destination now, and we're going to head out to Blandford using the B3082. Now, you might be thinking, surely you can just use the A350, and you can, but then we'd miss out on a story about a good bridge known as Whitemill Bridge, located near Sturminster Marshall. What kind of name is that? Anyway, about that bridge. Here it is, and it's believed to be the oldest bridge in Dorset, which remains pretty much as per the day it was constructed in the 1500s. It's built out of white limestone and red sandstone so as to give it a striking colour contrast. Yeah, maybe when it was new. Its total length is 64 metres, and the road that it carries over the River Stour is very narrow at only 3.6 metres wide, and that's because the road has never been widened or modernised. Keep an eye out for this sign which warns that you'll be shipped off elsewhere should you be caught damaging the bridge structure, and it was this style of law enforcement that gave us the modern-day Australia. Our final stop for the day brings us to Bournemouth. In the days of my guidebook, a busy place with over 90,000 residents. Today, there are over 195,000 people living here, making Bournemouth the largest town in Dorset. And it seems that most of its size is or was down to the tourism industry. My guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to take a look at the Winter Gardens, which today might require some imagination. This is a car park, but it used to be home to the Bournemouth Winter Garden, a glass structure built in 1875 that was very similar to London's Crystal Palace. Initially, it opened as an exhibition centre, but immediately it became obvious that exhibitions were not enough to keep the building and business afloat, so it was turned into a music venue and theatre. For reasons unknown, it was demolished in 1935 and replaced with a hideous brick building which would continue to be used as a music venue, seeing performances from acts like the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, David Bowie and Rolf Harris. The building was demolished in 2006 and turned into this car park. My guidebook also recommends a visit to Boscombe Chine, which is what it refers to as a pleasure garden. It dates back to the Victorian times and the rise of tourism in the area, and what was previously an expanse of land was turned into this pleasure garden by landscaping and levelling land, adding pathways and things like tennis courts and croquet pitches. A mineral water spring was discovered on the site, and the area became known as Boscombe Spa, which, being a fancy name, attracted tourists from all over. But that didn't last forever, and eventually the gardens fell into a poor state due to a lack of use, and by the 1990s it was a popular destination for undesirables. Today, thanks to a bit of lottery funding, the gardens have been fully restored back to their former glory, which I'd love to show you, but it's pissing it down. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Till then, take care, bye bye.